Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. This guy has made it his life's work to make the roads that we travel on safer. And he does that by making sure that motor carriers or companies that haul different types of material adhere to the guidelines. And he is hired by many people to do just that. He's worked as a safety investigator with the government, has trained both law enforcement and motor carriers on all of this stuff. He even travels around the world to help get this done. Live and direct from Mexico. This is Safety First with Matt Freeman. Welcome back, Matt. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well down here in Guadalajara this week. Like you said, traveling around the world, working with manufacturers who want to bring their products to the United States. You know, in this particular case, we're looking at a cargo tank that they are building.
So they're building it there, and it's going to be brought into the U.S. or different tanks.
We're right now we're looking at high pressure cargo tanks. We're doing a company down here in Guadalajara. The stuff that they're wanting to build for would be like your propane gases.
Gotcha.
Okay, liquid petroleum gas. You know, so they are looking to build a tank. They build from Mexico now, and they're looking to build a tank to go into the United States. So in order to build that tank, they got to meet U.S. standards. And that's what we're here to help them do. So when they come across the border, they have a tank that meets U.S. standards and gets approved right away.
Wow. So what stage are they in now in Guadalajara, and how do you support them as they move through that?
Yeah, sure. So what we do is in any company that works with you that brings anything in the United States, especially on the hazmat side, okay, they're required to have certain training to make sure that they're meeting all the qualifications to build and inspect that tank. Okay, that's how the U.S. regulatory system is set up on the hazardous material side. Okay, so we're down here doing registered inspector training to all their engineers, quality control guys who do that initial inspection once that tank is completed to make sure it's going out the door with everything it needs to be safe once it gets to the U.S. or any customer they send it to.
Is it possible to give us a closer look at that, what you're dealing with, maybe even today or even this week, the things that you're looking at? And are they in the building stage, or are they in the planning stage? You know, is it on the screen? It hasn't been built yet.
Yes and no. They are building tanks here. They're one of the largest companies here in Mexico.
Wow.
So they build tanks for companies here in Mexico, Mexican government. Already. So, but they have to be tweaked with a different design. So they are kind of at the drawing board again on making a new design for the U.S. to meet all the regulatory requirements. There are some things here a little bit more loosely, what I mean, from different types of regulations. So yeah, they're kind of at the drawing board right now, and that's what we're here to do. And one of the things we assist on is not just the cargo tank itself, but we also help them with the standards on the safety side. We want to make sure they have the right lights, braking systems, chassis, everything that, you know, it actually helps that tank move down the road, not just the cargo tank itself. So they are at the drawing board, and that's what we're here to help them with. And we're starting from almost from scratch with this particular model.
Wow. What are you looking at? Things that you're making suggestions for at this time?
The key thing is, you know, they're building these tanks to the standards that's required. Okay, this is a high pressure cargo tank, so they have to meet ASME standards. The ASME is where all the guidance comes on how to design these cargo tanks, regardless if it's high pressure or low pressure. So we're making sure that they're following those guidelines. U.S. regulation says you have to meet certain requirements of the ASME code, and that's what we're here to do. We're not here to teach them ASME because they're engineers; they're supposed to know this. We're here to teach them why they need to follow this to meet the U.S. standards.
So going a little bit deeper here, these particular tanks will be brought into the U.S. What's the service life on something like that? I'm assuming these are tanks that are on vehicles that we see that transport propane, let's say to supplier stores, things like that. What's the, I know, you know, on our consumer tanks, for the barbecue, there is a shelf life and it's actually stamped on it. And when it gets past that, they won't refill it. What is it for something that big?
Yeah, most of these high pressure tanks, they're almost indestructible. They last a long time, depending on what they're being used for. They're built with a heavier steel.
Wow.
They could. What happens with these tanks most of the time is they will outlive the chassis
Wow.
because they're built so well. Now, with what you're saying about testing, they still have to be tested annually, and every 5 years, depending on what tests they're doing to meet those standards. Now, your small cylinders, like you're talking about your propane, they build those here as well. There's different set rules and regulations on the smaller cylinders, depending on what they're. A lot of times it comes down to the chemical, okay, how rough the chemical is on the tank itself. So yeah, they have to meet those standards, and depending on if they're keeping those tanks up as required, they can last, just as long as we do sometimes. I mean, the
Wow.
oldest tank I ever saw, just to give you an idea, was the oldest one I think I ever saw was like 1959, 1960, right in that area. And this was 15 years ago when I saw that one. So it gives you an idea of how long these tanks will last. And that tank had been moved to 3 different chassis in its lifetime.
Unbelievable. See, I've
Yeah.
never thought that. I would think that, rust would come into play at some point. And, looking at something that's not so corrosive like liquid propane, now you're just dealing with pressure. Because these are being transported, there's a lot of bouncing around. There's a lot going on. Do they even look at the integrity of the welds on these tanks?
Yes, very, very good question. And that is one of the big things that we do look at. Even when we're walking around doing inspections with our customers, and we do a visual. That's the one thing we train them to look for. Look for cracks, look for bad welds, look for leaks. Because when they're doing these testing on them, the test will it checks the design of the weld. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if they're putting pressure on, if the weld gives, if it leaks, whatever it may be, there's cracks there. Then you got repairs, and there's a process for those repairs. So, as far as our register inspectors, your cargo tank facilities where people take their tanks to do testing on them, that's one thing we train them with. So make sure you're looking at the welds and all the different things that supports anything that's going to apart or attach to that tank.
I have the visual of getting propane, and you have the luxury when it's a 20-pound tank. Uh,
Mhm.
they put it in water to you can't do that to look for bubbles and leaks. You can't do that on a tank that's on a rig.
So what they'll do is we depending on what type of test you're doing, we have them usually like a spray bottle. And one of the best things I tell folks to get one of those spray pumps, like for like the bug sprayers,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
use it with
The
soapy
top part.
water. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that way, they're not filling up that little soapy bottle, 20 times. They're just doing one swipe. And that's how they're checking for leaks, doing testing on it. Um, it is very interesting. We can have a whole segment just on how the testing works. I think that's
Hmm.
we get a lot of questions and hows and whys, and didn't realize that.
Wow. Uh, what are the regulations for something that's being transported in terms of an accident? Is there, how do you determine, all right, so let's say the vehicle's going down the road, it's got a tank on it, there's an accident. You want to prevent spillage, explosion, all of that. Are there any what are the regulations surrounding that kind of thing?
Yeah, boy, there's a whole book on that really.
Mm,
Some of the just go through some of the basics. They have what they call rollover protection. Okay, not just propane tanks, but all cargo tanks. Okay, and they're required to have rollover protection. What that is
wow.
depending on if you look at the crow's nest on top of the tank where the manway is
Yes.
to go into the tank. Okay, they have like looks like a crow's nest on top. Okay, protects any piping or plumbing. So if the tank does roll over, okay, it's not breaking off any of that piping. Okay. Just as an example. Also, there's different types of emergency shutoffs that are set up on these tanks. You have internal, external shutoffs. So if the tank, if let's say there's a rollover and for whatever reason, the bottom plumbing of the tank gets snapped off, there's an automatic shut off that goes up in there. So when that pops off, it shuts off to prevent spillage. So there's a lot of regulatory that goes into it. And when they do these tests and inspections of these cargo tanks, these are things that they're looking at, making sure nothing exceeds that height level over the road of protection. There's different ways that works. Give you an idea, like some of these tanks, if you go down the road, you look on each end of the tank, right? You'll see maybe like a little pop, like a little brace that stands up on each end. And you probably know, if you might look at that. That's what they consider rollover protection. So any pipe in the top of that tank has to be below that. So the idea and design of this, when it rolls over, it's not technically hitting that. Okay, that rollover keeps that up. Okay. Now we all know about how accidents work. That's not always going to prevent things, but that's the design, and they have to stick to that.
These are all the things that we don't know as just people driving down the road and seeing these vehicles pass by. How do they determine how much material is in a tank? Are there sensors, or it's basically you measure what's going in and then the gauges measure what's going out to determine, where you're at?
Yeah, there's overflow prevention systems put in there. So you know how much is going into the tank when they fill them up. Depending on the tank, what's being put in there. Okay, so if it's a high pressure tank, they have different ways they fill those. If it's a low pressure tank, it might be from the top feed, it could be a bottom feed. It just depends on what the material is that they're transporting at the time. But there are mechanisms let them know how much is in there.
So the tanks that you're looking at with the manufacturing in Mexico, could they potentially be transporting gasoline as well?
Boy, that's an open question. So these tanks are built, okay, depending on the chemical, all right, the hazardous material. There's in the regulations, it tells you what chemicals, what gases can go in what tanks. Okay. If you're looking up gasoline, or depending on the product you're using, and it says you're allowed to put it in, say, particular tank I'm looking at today is an MC 3331 high pressure tank. Looks like a big pill. Okay, the big propane tanks. Okay. If the regulations for that particular material said you can put it in that tank, then yes, you can put it in that tank. Okay. I don't like to just say yes, you can put anything in it. No, you have to go use what they call the 101 table in the 49 CFR hazmat regulations. But the answer is yes. I have seen it where they have put gasoline in those tanks.
How do you make the determination that it's suitable for gasoline, as opposed to, let's say, liquid propane or another material?
So say it one more time, sorry.
How do you make sure that the tank is appropriate for something that's flammable, like gasoline, as opposed to liquid propane, which is flammable, but it's in a different way?
Again, there's a chart at the 101 table, and you go through the chart. It's going to have your ID numbers. It's going to let you know what that tank, that gas, or that chemical can go in. So there's a process to the type of chemical it is. If it's corrosive, for example, okay, you can't just put a corrosive in a tank. Okay, certain things require linings, things like that. So it really depends on what the chemical is and what the table allows it to go into. That's what it really comes down to.
Matt, have you ever been? I know you've done investigations before, but have you ever investigated a situation involving one of these types of tanks?
Yes, I have. One of the last ones I did was an incident where they had a crack in the chassis and the tank rolled over. The tank was fine, but the chassis was mangled pretty good. Just to give you an idea of how strong these tanks are. So there's incidents, there's different ones. And depending on the situations are always different. Apologize, they're working out in the warehouse out here.
Right.
So it really, I've done a couple of different ones. I've done one where there was a gasoline tanker that caught fire. So basically, you're just going in to make sure that they followed all the safety procedures on it, and multiple reasons of why it happened. One time we had one that had a failure. The um, the pressure relief device failed and didn't allow the pressure to pop in time. Just to give you an idea, without getting into all the details of a cargo tank. But yeah, so there's these things happen all the time. You've seen things on the news, in the last few years of tanks that there's been an explosion or caught fire or something like that. And all these tanks are built with safety features on them to go off to help prevent, a lot of these anything major. For example, propane. Um, Whenever you see the flames shooting out the top of a propane tank, it's called a levee. So that's actually releasing all that pressure. That's what it's supposed to do. So if you see fire coming out, it's called a levee, and it releases all that pressure. So you want it to levee out to get that pressure out of it. And you notice you'll see sprinkler systems on them but they're trying to cool the tanks down. Is what they're doing. Just to give you an idea, like in these plants and stuff with the tanks.
Wow. Okay. Wasn't aware of that. So there are sprinkler systems built into those or on the trucks, the rigs with that carry those tanks.
Well, I'm talking about stationary tanks. Okay,
Oh,
they'll
okay.
have they'll have
Gotcha.
systems set up in place. Now, even when a cargo tank, if it bloovies, you want it to bloovy. So when you're spraying the water on it, you're trying to cool the tank down so it doesn't blow out. Okay, because you're trying to get your the bloovy releases. It's supposed to do that, lets that pressure out. The last thing you want to have is a pressure vessel going, kaboom. So. Um, so again, that's what those safety features are built on. I'm trying to pretty stay focused because there's so many different things that could cause something, and so many safety features that have to be required. And that's what we do. We make sure that they have all the safety features that's required, all the regulatory and testing to help prevent these things ever happening. Um,
It stands to reason there really aren't that many accidents involving these cargo tanks. There really aren't. You hardly ever even in history see it. And now I see why, because they're built so strong and sturdy. And there's lots of regulations that go along with that.
Yeah, so many regulations go along with the cargo tanks, the hazardous materials. You have accidents, but the major accidents, are more seldom than often. Um, and that's where we want it to be. These things are dangerous. Could you imagine if with just some of the incidents that we've seen so far, where they've blown up underneath bridges. I physically uh, saw one blow up under a bridge. Well, let me rephrase it. I was away from where it came. I was down the road uh, when I was working years ago, and when that thing went off, it looked like an atomic bomb. It
Wow.
was calling ethanol, and it was burning so hot that it actually burned up the bridge under the city I lived in. It was a little small overpass, but it hit a curb. The driver hit a curb too fast. Or I'm sorry, hit a corner too fast, rolled it over, and it ignited when he hit, and it just destroyed the little overpass. And but it wasn't the tank's fault. It was the driver. Took the corner too quick, and sad. There's a fatality of it. But I was probably about
Oh,
10 miles away when I saw that happen. I just got off work, and I just shook my head like, this isn't good. Then obviously I get a call and find out what happened. And, we start working on when there's going to be an investigation for it. So,
amazingly, one small mistake, hitting a curb, whatever it might be, can turn into such a magnitude of challenges. We've talked before about the regulations for the drivers in different situations, how long they can be operating a rig, the breaks that they need to take, all of that. What applies here for cargo tanks? Is it different?
yes, it's more stringent. There's a whole different set of rules and regulations. Next time we're on, I'll bring the rules and regulations with me, and I'll show you the different books. You have the 49 CFR hazmat regulations, which any type of hazmat falls in there. Then you have the safety regs, which, to break it down, to be the chassis, the brakes, all the safety side of that, and then the tank sets on top of it. So now you got to make sure everything meets those requirements. Some things
Yeah.
as little as supports that go in there to keep that tank stable, that are in the regulations and requirements for those.
I would imagine we've talked before a lot about the pre and post safety checks, but magnify that now because you're not just making sure that the integrity of the carrier is okay. Now you're carrying something. You have to make sure that uh, typically, how long does a pre or post check take for a vehicle that's transporting a cargo tank?
Yeah, so they kind of have two kinds of checks. They still have to do their pre and post trip inspection, but if you're transporting hazmat, you're looking at a few more things. You're making sure you got your markings are on there, your placarding's there. You're doing a quick walk around to make sure nothing's leaking. The last thing you want to do is go down the road and have something spilling or leaking, and again, got that trickle effect. You don't want it to either trickle up or snowball down. So yeah, I mean, there is a little bit more to it when you have a hazmat. Um, it's a dangerous. Even if it's a tank full of paint, paint's still considered to be a hazardous material.
Hmm.
So I tell folks, irregardless if it's in that 101 table in the regulations, treat it as a bomb. Take it serious no matter what it is. And I've had people say, "Oh, I'm just transporting paint." Paint's still considered to be a hazardous material depending on the type of paint you're transporting. So I tell these guys to make sure they're taking it serious, and they do. And most of the drivers out there, if not all of them, know that they have to look at these other additional things for first responders, basically. In a sense, your placarding, your markings, they got to be there.
And I would imagine too, if you're a driver and there's a situation, you need to help and direct, the first responders and all of that. So I
Right.
would imagine there's a lot of safety training that goes into play there.
Mhm. Yeah, there's certain things that they have to keep in the cab with them, keep within arm's reach. Certain requirements, such as a shipping paper, your safety data sheet. You got to have this stuff in quick so when responder comes, if he can get to it, he needs to get to it because he needs to know what's in that tank. That's where the markings come in place, with the placarding, the diamond shaped,
Yep.
different colors. Those numbers, the ID numbers, are what the chemical is or the product is, and the number below it is the class. So that's how you know if it's a corrosive, if it's a flammable, a poison, whatever it may be. It's by those numbers, and that's what those first responders see. So when they come to the scene, they know how to clear the area. What's going on? What do we have?
I can see the placard in my mind. I can see red, I see yellow, there's different colors that go along with
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
Uh, how does if somebody owns a company that is a motor carrier or concerned with safety and what they do in terms of transport, how do they connect with you to really start the process to make sure that things are done right?
Yeah, no, they can reach me at matt@dottrainingsolutions.com. Give me a call at 573-416-8203. That's my direct number. I always have people call that. We also have an 800 number that's on our website, which is dottrainingsolutions.com. And so, yeah, please reach out to me and we can set up any kind of training, consulting, whatever we need to do to keep your company safe.
Yeah, awesome talking with you. And Jack, when you said you were going to Mexico last week, I thought you were going on vacation. I didn't know that you went outside the U.S. for this kind of stuff, which super cool, but needs to get done to make sure it's safe. Thanks for being here, Matt, and good luck and enjoy your stay there.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Yep, we'll talk next time. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.